Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Explosive Alan podcast. My name is Simon, and it's just me this week while I present to you a rather different episode of the show. It's not what our usual listeners are used to, but I hope it's something you all enjoy because it's something I felt I had to do. Let me start this episode by saying that I, Simon Chung, am a gay man. That might be easy for me to say so publicly now, but that took me the better part of my first 22 years to really accept. But, much like the god-awful Prison Break game, I pressed B and made it out of the closet, eventually. Now, at a fabulously rainbow-tastic 30 years old, I'm not the kind of guy who'd greet someone and announce my sexuality within the first 10 seconds like I just did there, but I also wouldn't shy away from it. For example, I'd say my boyfriend rather than my partner in conversation. Being gay doesn't define who I am as a person, but I am at a stage where I'm proud of my sexuality. This month, as in June for anyone listening after the fact, is Pride Month, and it's actually Pride Weekend down here in London this coming weekend. That's the 25th and the 26th of June. So I've created and released this episode to celebrate that fact. I've been working on this episode for a month and a half at this point, but tragically during the process of making this, the absolutely abhorrent events in America took place in which a gunman murdered 49 people in the gay nightclub Pulse in Orlando and injured 53 others. That's the death rate as of time of recording. So, most importantly, I'd like to dedicate this episode to everyone who lost their lives and to everyone who was injured in that senseless act of violence. We are Orlando, we are strong, and love always wins. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering, has Simon lost his mind here? Why is he ranting, and what is this all about? Well, on the podcast a few weeks ago, Gareth asked a question in the middle of a great debate that threw me a little. It put me on the spot and my awful answer stuck with me. I wasn't expecting the question at all, but in a butterfly effect style ripple, it sent me on this path of finding out my opinion on something that I had rather stupidly never really considered. Here's the clip.
How would you feel about seeing more gay sex scenes in a...
How would I feel about it? Well...
Mass Effect has.
Do you feel like
Mass
it's something
Effect
that is missing? Do you feel like you're represented enough or not enough? Would you care?
I don't know that I care, which is probably really bad, isn't it?
Pretty dumb of me, right? Okay, so cards on the table because I want to be as frank and honest as I can here to get across why I feel I needed to do this. I'm quite ashamed to confess that I'm not a guy who's really had to stand up and fight for anything in his life. I've lived quite safely and I've been incredibly fortunate to be surrounded by family and friends who love and accept me for who I am. I came out as a gay man riding on the coattails of all the great, strong LGBT heroes of the past who've spent their whole lives fighting for equality across the world. And when I'm asked a simple question of whether I feel I'm being represented well enough in video games, on a video games-based show on which technically I represent the homosexual voice, I seize up and I come back with a rather pathetic, I don't know that I care. So to everyone listening, lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, straight, whoever you may be, I'm genuinely sorry for saying that. When I edited the podcast back, I wanted to jump back in time and punch past Simon for saying something so bloody nonch. I considered cutting it from the episode, but I'd have known what had happened still, so I thought I'd leave it in and it would fuel me to go out there and research something that's clearly important to me, in a field that's very important to me. We need people who are willing to stand up and openly discuss this stuff, to not shy away from it and to represent. And if I can do that, even in my small corner of the internet that is the Explosive Alan podcast, then I'm damn well going to do it. It's no small understatement for those who know me to say that gaming is my life, and yet, in equal measure, without me considering it, so is my sexuality. Of course I should care about this stuff. I watched Sean Penn's Milk, and it made me feel guilty for sitting on my ass for 2 hours and not helping any courses, and, I watched Pride and thought, yeah, though you got Thrill completely wrong, it made me feel the same way. I'm very aware that I haven't done enough, and we probably all feel a bit like that sometimes. So, I thought I'd put together this rather different episode of the Explosive Alan podcast. It might offend some people, but you know what? I'm not too fussed about that at this point. I offended myself, and to be honest, if it does offend you, then you're probably not the kind of person I want listening to the show anyway. I thought I'd put this together so I can abuse this platform I have and so that we can all learn a thing or two and basically try and figure out this one question. Is the LGBT community being represented enough in video games? Now, if you're thinking, Simon, that's one bloody broad question, then you'd be right. It is. It's probably why I froze so much when I was asked the first time. Where do you start on something like that? How do you begin to answer it? Well, there's a Wikipedia page I can refer to, obviously, there's a bloody Wikipedia page for everything, but as you expect, that's quite impartial, and I want to know how I feel about it, and I want to know how you feel about it too. So in typical Explosive Alan podcast style, I'm keeping this very community-led. Throughout this show, you'll hear interviews with market researchers, PRs, game devs, and the community as a whole. I wanted to explore as far as I could to really understand how the LGBT community is represented and how we feel about it. But hey, enough sob story waffling on about how you said a dumb thing. It's time to rectify that and start the show. So, where should I actually start? Well, you know what? Going back to the beginning actually isn't really the worst idea. So follow me, friends. We're going back in time. Hold on! It's 1972. Games are starting to be a thing. Pong is out, and while you could interpret Pong as being two dicks slapping a ball around marking the introduction of gayness to video games, it obviously isn't. Plus, it's the 70s. It's actually not until 1986 that we had our first taste of an LGBT character in a game, in the form of mystery text-based adventure called Moon Mist on the Amiga and the Atari ST. The character in question is a female criminal who is jealous because her girlfriend is married to a man. One of the biggest from the 80s is popular Nintendo character Birdo. The first edition manual for Super Mario Bros. 2 on the NES listed Birdo as a male who believes that he is a female, marking Nintendo's first transgender character. They've backtracked the living daylight out of that now, but more on Nintendo later. From there on, you'd have various other minor mentions, but they were so rarely shown in any realistic context and generally were the butt of most jokes. Researching back into older games, I don't think I really found it much of a surprise that most all interpretations of the LGBT community in games are ridiculously over the top and basically comical. Male characters, for example, were mega effeminate or flamboyant with crazy mannerisms and dress and speech. Basically, if you were gay or lesbian, then your mannerisms were stereotypical of the opposite sex. They're more often than not villains as well, which is fun. It really probably goes without saying that back then being gay just wasn't as openly discussed as it is now. You can chalk that up to society and people of that time, but in my research, I came across something I'd not heard of before. I wanted to keep this episode solely games focused, but I think it's impossible not to reference television and film history when we're talking about an evolution in the storytelling medium. Essentially, what I found was something called the production code. What's that, Simon? Well, the production code was a set of industry moral guidelines that applied to major US studios from 1930 to 1968. It laid a foundation for what was acceptable and what wasn't for motion pictures, and it features such wonderful things that shouldn't appear in film, like white slavery, sex between races, children's sex organs, and ridicule of the clergy. And whilst it didn't really allow straight sex, it of course had a ban on homosexuality. Though it didn't word it specifically, there was a loophole. You could show an effeminate man or a manly woman, but no actual sexual conduct between them. This effectively gave Hollywood its stereotypes. Let's apply that to early LGBT characters in gaming, and it totally lines up. Now, let's refocus on me, and think back to how a young Simon Chong would interpret all of this. I lived in a very small village in North Wales, and I'd say I got 90% of my entertainment input from video games. Like I said, gaming was my life and probably my escape. I refused to watch most TV and soaps because, well, that's what my mum and my sister liked, and watching the news was not an answer, no matter how hard you tried Newsround. Young Simon wouldn't know that young Simon was gay at all yet, or really what being gay was, but he'd find it funny to laugh at this silly different character in a game that he was playing. As far as I remember, I didn't have any gay role models, and I didn't know anyone who was gay, well, as far as I was aware anyway. Add in that I was terribly slow at developing sexually, and it's easy to assume that my brain just didn't click at all that the character I was watching on the screen was meant to represent a community that I'd grow up to be a part of. Looking back, it's confusing. I had nothing to lead the way. I know I didn't feel like I was anything like that man on screen, so I'm not surprised that I had no idea what I was doing. Looking back, you could absolutely say that young me would say I definitely didn't feel represented. I feel I should point out at this point, though, that I'm not saying that these extreme representations of LGBT are wrong, of course. Different strokes for different folks. Some could have massively identified with these characters. It's just my personal experience with how I felt. But then, the year 2000 happened. I turned 15. The Spice Girls were ending, and I was sadder than I'd ever been about anything ever. I mean, what would Emma Bunton do now? I should have known then, really, but, I didn't. And then a little game called The Sims came along. It was unlike anything I'd ever played before. I was acting out people's lives the way I wanted them to. I played it and I noticed that I was able to get two male characters to interact in a way that involved more than just talking. I was able to get them to hug, have conversations that involved hearts, and even kiss. It was incredible. It was the first time that I'd ever played anything where I felt that I related on a level I couldn't quite describe. I was able to get these two characters that I'd created in an image that I wanted to do the things that I'd only seen a man and a woman do together previously. And I remember it feeling exhilarating, almost naughty. I remember feeling like my world would end if my mum dared walk in on me playing this game on the computer in the living room and see me making these characters sit on a sofa together and talk. Of course, knowing what I know now, I'd definitely say that this was a turning point in my video games history and life that really made me feel that I wasn't odd, or that I wasn't different. It's just at the time, I didn't know how to process those feels and resorted to fear because it seemed like the right thing to do. Role-playing games overall have been an incredible genre to embrace the LGBT community. It's the first genre that allowed same-sex relationships. BioWare, for example, have been amazing and have had same-sex romance options and LGBT characters in many of their games, even as far back as Baldur's Gate in 1998. Krem in Dragon Age Inquisition is openly transsexual and is fully accepted by peers. Iron Bull, his close friend, for example, will leave your party if your character acts transphobic. There's differing opinions on whether RPG's LGBT characters are a good thing, but I'll return to that point later. The Metal Gear games have also included the LGBT community across the series. In Metal Gear 2, the character Vamp was revealed to be a bisexual character. It doesn't dwell on it or define him, it's just mentioned in conversation and then they carry on. And then there's the fantastic Ellie from The Last of Us, an absolutely incredible and heroic female character in her own right, who director Neil Druckmann has confirmed as gay. She's a fantastic role model for the community and someone I'd be proud to look up to as a younger teen, even though they shouldn't be playing the game, obviously. But, as I mentioned earlier, there's a fair few notable LGBT characters in games that have been portrayed as villains or having mental issues, or both. In researching this episode, I was pointed toward a video on YouTube by The Game Theorist titled "Are Video Games Anti-LGBT?" It's a fantastic video that's well worth watching, but they pointed me towards three awful examples of prominent LGBT characters. There's Trevor from Grand Theft Auto 5, who seems to be attracted to the same sex, but then is also bipolar. And you have Alfred Ashford from Resident Evil, and though this is a prominent example of cross-dressing, he's a crazy villain, and it's implied he's in an incestuous relationship with his sister. And finally, there's Red Dead Redemption's Captain Vincent DeSanta. He's implied to be gay or bisexual, and when he's defeated, the line, "A lot of young boys will sleep safer in their beds now." So gay, villain, and a paedophile. Fantastic work there. I know I'm jumping about from time to time at this point, but an interesting one to research has been fighting games. There's seemingly many characters across fighting games who are either confirmed or suspected to be gay. Zangief from Street Fighter being one of the top contenders, as well as Kung Jin from Mortal Kombat back in 1994. Sega made changes to Streets of Rage 3 when it was released in the West. There was initially a boss in the game named Ash who was gay. He'd fall into the comically gay category for sure because of the village people attire he wore, but Sega decided to remove him. And that got me thinking, how do various publishers deal with LGBT in games, and what are their stances on it all? Let's find out. Nintendo. Nintendo. I love you so very much. Anyone who listens to the podcast knows that of me, so I was cautious in investigating them in case I found something awful, but investigate I did, and this is what I found. It's worth noting with Nintendo that in order to legally release a game for one of their systems, you've got to first obtain permission from Nintendo. This gives them the right to change things to their will before release. I mean, I get it, I understand they have a certain quality to uphold, but it extends to themes within the games too that they aren't allowed to display or reference, such as drugs, tobacco and alcohol, violence against women, blood and graphic violence, profanity, nudity, religious symbols, political advocacy, or sexually suggestive or explicit content. All fair enough, right? Mario can't really be seen taking drugs, understandably. though eating mushrooms is fine apparently. And while none of these reference any kind of negativity towards the LGBT community, they've been guilty of removing references before a game has been released. I mentioned Birdo already, but in 1992, Enix were ordered to remove a gay bar from Dragon Warrior 3. And the SNES version of Ultima 7 removed options of a male or female bedmate. Come 1992 though, Nintendo changed. They abandoned most of their censorship policies, and a year later, Banjo-Kazooie came out. I have absolutely no memory of this, but in its sequel, the frog bartender named the Jolly Roger was gay. The frog wanted Banjo and Kazooie to rescue his co-worker, Merry Maggie, a cross-dressing amphibian who appeared to be Jolly Roger's lover. Again, comedy gay, but gay nonetheless. Nintendo also re-released Dragon Warrior 3 for Game Boy Color, allowing all that content that was previously cut provided it had a teen rating. Brilliant steps forward, you may think, but then the character Vivian in Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door is strongly hinted at being transgender. But Nintendo removed all references to this in the English translation. And then came Tomodachi Life. This one really did rile me up. Marriage is a pretty big part of that game. I mean, it's bonkers, colourful, and makes absolutely no sense, and yet you can't have same-sex marriages. It seems an awfully intentional omission from Nintendo, and one that's really just frustrated me. But then, now they have Bayonetta, and who knows what she is, I just love her. But again, that's a teen game. Sega. I also love Sega. Space Channel 5 is one of the most fabulous games I've ever played. I bloody love it. It celebrates life and colour and silly gaming in the most joyous of ways. They couldn't possibly try and halt things, could they? But then they did censor that boss from Streets of Rage 3. Actually, in Sega's credit, they were a lot more lax about policing of their games. They allowed more graphic violence and more sexually suggestive themes, and they allowed LGBT characters in games, though they toned it down when porting Asian games. For example, Phantasy Star 2 had a gay musician. The only acknowledgement that remained was that he'd charge male characters less for lessons. How fabulous of him. In 1994 though, Sega dropped its own content policing in favour of the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or ESRB. In 1994, the ESRB was formed. They were there to independently assign individual games content ratings and descriptions according to its content. And, in all their 1994 wisdom, they decided that identifying of sexuality falls under the sexual content description, which means it's only allowed for games rated teen to adults only. And this is it. This is what I think above all things that I've spoken about and researched so far gets me really frustrated. And this fundamentally is where I think things need to change the most. The very idea that revealing a character associates as LGBT, no matter how innocent the content may be, is something only a teen to an adult would be able to handle, to me, is insane. What frustrated me the most is that I wasn't able to absolutely verify that piece of information either. I'd read it online, but I couldn't find anything from the source. So, I got my journalist hat on and I contacted the ESRB directly to ask them about it. I asked them if they could confirm that identifying sexuality, regardless of context, would class the game as teen or adult. They replied with the following within 12 hours. Quote, "We understand that sexual themes have the potential to be of concern to parents, which is why all such content must be disclosed during the rating process. ESRB's ratings criteria do not distinguish between heterosexual and same-sex content when it comes to addressing sexuality in games. Additionally, sexuality is considered across the entire spectrum of our ratings. There is no default rating for where something might fall. Context is a key element in our ratings process." End quote. Now, I don't know about you, but I wasn't satisfied with that answer. It's so vague, and I feel none the wiser. So, I replied and posed them with a hypothetical gaming situation and how they'd go about rating it. Quote, "Take for example Super Mario. Let's say we're introduced to Mario's parents in one of the games. Now, if Mario's parents were a man and a woman and they never once reference their sexuality or do anything sexual at all, they're still inadvertently revealing their sexuality as a straight couple. Now, same situation, but let's imagine that this time Mario's parents are both men. Again, nothing seedy, naughty or anything sexual at all, they just are his parents. That would be revealing their sexuality as well. So my question is, how would the ESRB rate that? I know it's a totally hypothetical situation, but I'm really just trying to understand the best I can the specifics of how things like that are rated." End quote. I sent that reply on the 11th of June 2016 and I'm yet to have an answer. Hopefully they can get back to me with something a bit more concrete, but we'll see. And that's where I think we'll leap off from all my research on the subject into speaking openly with others. With you, the community. Over the last month and a half, I've put together a series of interviews with people from all corners of the games industry who make up sections of the LGBT community. So, everyone, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, telling me a short bit about what you do and what you identify as. Go.
Hello, my name's Aoife Wilson. I work for Eurogamer and I identify as bisexual.
I'm Frank. I work in marketing and computer games, and I'm gay.
My name is Andy Greer, and I'm an audio designer, musician, and I am gay.
Hey there, I'm Erica. I am a software developer. I am a trans woman.
My name is Keza MacDonald. I am the editor of Kotaku UK. I am bisexual.
My name is Sarah, and I work at GameSpot as a production editor, and I identify as queer.
I'm Jem Alexander. I am a writer in the games industry. My sexuality is I am very gay.
Very gay. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me. Let's get to some questions. Let's start with, have any of you ever looked into LGBT in games yourselves? Aoife, let's start with you.
I have actually, yeah. It's a topic that is really interesting to me from a personal angle as well, but also just I think that it's a really interesting topic for discussion, and I've actually talked about it before in panels with the BFI and a few other places, and I've made videos about it on YouTube. When I'm playing games and, you know, I see that little glimmer of representation, I'm thinking about kids who are playing these games, and I really hope that they see that and feel like they're included and welcome.
And how about you, Keza?
Yes, LGBT stuff in games has been a bit of a preoccupation of mine, partly because it intersects so much with other diversity concerns in games, like obviously female representation and minority representation in general and racial representation, which is all stuff I started getting interested in when I was maybe 20, 21, and I've been playing games for a long, long time by then, and I just suddenly started to think when you play games you kind of get used to what they're like, and I certainly just realised that I'd gotten so used to it I wasn't questioning anymore. And there was kind of a reawakening of cultural conversation around games in around about kind of 2010, 2011, and suddenly everyone seemed to get terribly woke all of a sudden. And around that time I started writing about it more as well. So of course to some people on the internet, despite 11 years of extremely diverse writing, I'm just that chick who talks about the gay stuff.
Jem, have you looked into LGBT in games?
I've written a couple of articles about it. Last year I wrote about how Telltale's getting better at it, and sort of looping in Borderlands as well, because at the time Tales from the Borderlands was just coming out.
And Andy, what about you?
I've watched a couple of videos, especially from the GamerX conference. You know, people will say, why do you have a video gaming conference devoted to gays? What's that about? And then you look into it, you know, people put reasons saying, oh, it's a safe place for video gaming. It's not a safe place in the kind of physical sense of, oh, you're going to get beaten up because you're a homosexual. It's a safe place in terms of mentally, you can just be open. You can sit there and you can hold hands with your partner. You can, you know, cuddle him. You can have a kiss or whatever. Like, you've got no fear of people going, oh my God, you queers. Like, that's not going to happen. You can be open and free and be who you want to be.
That's excellent to hear that so many of you have looked into it, even if it's just as a passing interest. So my next question is, in the inevitably confusing time that involved understanding and realising your sexuality, did games help you at all? Frank?
They did, and I'm going to get deep here.
Get deep, it's fine.
You know, I think realising your sexuality, you feel very alien. You feel very different, and there's a lot of self-loathing involved. And that's when I became really drawn to role-playing games. Final Fantasy, Baldur's Gate, and, you know, even the more kind of action ones, Diablo as well. It put me into a world that wasn't my life, that I enjoyed more. Up until I was probably about 18, that was how actually I wanted to spend my life. I looked in a lot of social situations and thought I'd rather be home, you know, playing in these worlds where I was saving people and people were happy and I was progressing and I wasn't unsure of myself.
Erica, how about you?
Yes, I did something which I think is a pretty common experience with a lot of trans girls. As far as what I've read, you know, anecdotally from people, there's a time that many trans people experience between the time that they come out and go to the doctor and say, hey, look, I need help. You know, I've got gender dysphoria and it sucks and I need help. Between then and the time when you actually can get a prescription for hormone replacement therapy, which can take forever, it can be a really difficult time. And during that time was when Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn, first came out. And it was the first MMO which I'd really gotten into. You know, I'd dabbled in a few others before. This one was the first one which really got its hooks into me. Being able to just absorb myself in a lovely world and just kind of live a little more vicariously through a female avatar was actually really, really helpful for me.
Just to point out, Erica and I did our interview on Skype, but she lives up in Bristol, hence the difference in audio quality. Keza, did games help you?
I found games wholly useless for puzzling out my sexuality because of, the challenge of bi invisibility. You grew up in the 90s, you were aware that gay was a thing. Weren't really aware that bi was a thing. I certainly wasn't really. So I mostly dated dudes when I was a teenager, and then I fell in love with a woman and thought, oh no, I must have been gay all this time, and just completely kidding myself. And then, through other experiences, I came to realize that I hadn't just been lying to myself or fooling myself somehow for all these years, and actually it was completely fair to be bisexual. The problem being that there aren't that many people who were prominently bisexual, in games or otherwise.
It's a shame that the games couldn't help. Did they help you, Sarah?
No. Probably just a blanket no. Like, I don't remember there being any representation, so maybe that didn't help.
And how about you, Andy? And it's all right if the answer's no.
Well, it will be no. When I was realising that I was gay, the type of video games I were playing at that point were late NES, SNES era. So we're talking F-Zero, we're talking Pilot Wings, Super Star Wars, Mario Paint. None of these games had the scope for big, massive backstories and a character.
So it'd seem it helped some and not others. Some used it as an escape to help, while others looked to relate. Now let's look back on some memories. What was your first memory of experiencing an LGBT character in a game? Sarah?
So when I saw this question, I kind of had this automatic reaction of, I don't remember the first time, but I automatically presume it was a negative one. Because 90s, early noughties, growing up in that kind of era. But I don't remember a specific example. But even the fact that my presumption is that it was negative probably says a lot.
And what about you, Jem?
So there was a game called Ark the Lad 2. Ark the Lad was an old grid-based strategy RPG. It was a launch title for the PlayStation in Japan. And in the second game, there were a lot of characters that you could get. And there was a ninja called Shu and a samurai called Tosh. And they had little adventures together, which I was a bit like, this is interesting. These guys seem like more than just friends. And it was kind of, I think, the Romeo and Juliet thing where, samurai, ninja, etc. I can't find anything about them on the internet anymore. They have been lost to the annals of time.
Frank, what about you?
I think the first time it connected with me and it felt real was within Dragon Age, the original. It became very clear that I was talking to this character, that he could become gay, the guy that I'd chosen to play as, and one of the other NPCs was flirting with me, and I was a bit like, oh, okay, I can take this further. And in fact, you can take it all the way. But I didn't know this before playing the game, except for my uncle telling me, which was a very awkward conversation of him going, oh, well, I heard you can be a gay guy in this game. You'll enjoy that, Frank, kind of thing. And I was a bit like, ooh, and I wasn't out at the time, and he was kind of joking.
Oh, no!
Yeah, and he didn't know. It was a bit awkward.
And on to you, Aoife. What was your first experience?
So one of the first bits of representation I ever came across in a game of a bi character is in Metal Gear Solid 2. It's a character of Vamp who identifies as bisexual. And that's not, so he's a homicidal maniac who drinks blood. That's not a very positive bit of representation. No. However, his sexuality isn't really questioned, and that's something that goes on in later Metal Gear Solid games as well. There are a number of bi characters.
Keza, what was yours?
The first LGBT character I came across in the game was definitely The Sims. I played that together with friends. And that was definitely the first time I remember there being anything gay in any game I'd ever played. And, there are things you go back now and you see people writing essays about gay overtones in, Mario. But yeah, I don't remember picking up on any of that. The Sims was the first thing I picked up on, probably because it was quite overt.
Glad to know I wasn't the only one who appreciated The Sims for that reason. Now, what was your first portrayal of an LGBT character that you felt you've really related to? Frank?
This is an interesting one. Being a more kind of stocky fella, I'm what you call in the gay community a bear. I've not really actually related to an awful lot of characters. They tend to be the kind of classic male role models you see in movies and in any game, and not the kind of guy that I relate to or that I find attractive. So to this point, as far as I'm aware, I haven't really related to anyone particularly.
How about you, Erica?
There was a very, very short, very quick indiest of indie games called Dysphoria. And it was a very small vignette about somebody experiencing dysphoria and the social and medical obstacles which you have to go around in order to simply get the treatment that you need to get help with dysphoria and to transition. And I suppose those obstacles were realized in a gameplay sense too, just to give people an idea of how frustrating these steps can be.
So definitely everybody check out Dysphoria then. Keza, what was your first betrayal that you related to?
Ellie in The Last of Us was the first LGBT character I ever felt like properly like I related to her, because I got to know her as a person, not as an LGBT symbol. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like I got to know her as a cool girl, and then as you would in real life with a real person that you were getting to know, at some point it found out that she was gay. I just really related to her generally. You know, the fact that she was gay didn't make me relate to her more or less. It was just like but I thought it was such a natural kind of reveal. I was just like, oh, of course. Oh. And then it was like, oh, good, that's nice. There's someone, you know, there's another character in games that, you know, is just there.
And how about you, Aoife?
The first one that I really related to was probably In Life is Strange.
Oh.
Just because, you know, it was a very similar time in my life that was being portrayed, and it was a very similar way in, like, you're kind of pushing at the boundaries of between friendship and something a little bit more. And, you know, it was those endless summers where, you know, you were hanging out with the same people and very slowly getting to know your own feelings. And there's something about the way that game portrayed that.
Okay, let's move on and tell me, what's your favourite representation of LGBT in games? Andy, let's start with you.
So without doubt, it is Ellie from Last of Us.
Fantastic choice.
It genuinely destroyed me. And like the build up to that moment was fantastic, because, you know, they'd been it's been a while since I played it now, but, you know, they were messing about in the shopping centre. Yeah, they were taking photos of each other in the booth, and that was kind of cute and adorable. It posts it to your Facebook without telling you, and oh dear. But anyway, you then get to this kind of the kind of music store. They start dancing to like some Motown music or something with a Walkman, and then the camera just did this weird cutaway. You saw for like a frame their eyes met across the little thing, and I thought, oh, what was that? And something irked inside me, and I went, I think she likes her. Yeah. And then I think she likes her back. And then it was like, no, what? This is just DLC. Like, you know.
It's lovely. It's a really
gorgeous,
really touching scene. Fantastic choice. Jem?
I think The Last of Us, and that would be like the Left Behind DLC, because that was like the first time, because I've never been a ninja or a samurai. I've never been on adventures where I'm killing monsters and stuff, but I have been like confused, teen, preteen, with someone else who may not have been confused, and sort of been on that is it, isn't it journey. So that was very relatable. And so I guess that's why it's my favourite.
2 for 2 on The Last of Us there. What about you, Aoife?
My favourite is probably Bill from The Last of Us. I just think that it was really subtle, really underplayed, non-stereotypical, like we were saying. Like, here's a really gruff, like, kind of grizzled, grumpy guy, like a big, you know, man's man, as you would have thought. And it turns out he has, like, this really awesome, like, interesting side to him. Like, it was really well written, and that, like, so they've had this bust up, and he's actually really heartbroken over his partner Frank. And if you hadn't really read into certain signals, I don't think it would have fully registered with you what was happening. But if it did, and if you related to what was happening in that scene, it was really, really, like, potent, you know, what was happening.
The Last of Us is really doing pretty well here. Good job, Naughty Dog. Anything else, Frank?
I'd stick with Dragon Age still, purely because it was scripted in. It wasn't a kind of amendment, oh, by the way, he's gay, like with Zangief or some other characters, where they're just suddenly like, oh, by the way, he's gay. You know, there was a story to it, and you could, you know, fall in love with someone. And that was the part that I enjoyed, was that it was okay. No one was like, they're gay, you know, there was no repercussions. It was in a fantasy world, and it was like, okay, these two guys are loving each other, and we'll just get on with it, and the rest of the story plays out as normal.
And how about you, Sarah?
Gone Home. Okay, so I didn't play the game as soon as it came out. All I'd read was people saying don't read about it, but all I knew was it involved queer ladies in some way, and there was like a house or something. And because of the people that I was seeing talk about it, I thought it was one of those instances of, like, well-meaning straight people who think it's adorable that gay people exist. And then I foolishly played it in my office, and I was like, having feelings at my desk.
And from you, Erica?
So again, I cannot think of anything that's not very recent. But I would say that when I played through Undertale recently, the first time I played through, I did not know that you could save literally everybody in the game and go through the entire game playing completely pacifistically. And then I was absolutely delighted by how much better and more positive the game was, especially that character which I killed in the first place, Undyne. If you keep her alive, she ends up resolving a crush that she has with another character called Alphys, and even though they're both kind of monsters, they're not human characters. Their characters are so endearing and just nice and so great that when you see them kind of realizing the crushes that they have on each other, it was so adorable and so nice that it just gave me all the fuzzies.
Now, on the flip side, tell me, what have you found to be your worst representation of LGBT in games? Keza?
My worst one is Kanji from Persona 4. To give you some background, Kanji is one of the school group of friends in Persona, and he's a kind of big tough guy, he's in gangs and stuff, but he has secret gay feelings. So basically every kind of big dungeon and boss in Persona is a representation of their like inner psychological trauma and problems. So Kanji's is a big gay bathhouse.
Okay.
And the guy that you fight at the end is like a really, really camp effeminate version of Kanji, right? Which all could be good, but the way it's written or translated, I can't tell you what the Japanese was like, but the way it's translated is very much like Kanji is, oh no, he's not gay after all. He's just struggling with ideas of masculinity. And it's a bit like, that's a cop-out. It's a real cop-out. And there's a lot of lines in the game that just sort of directly go against, oh, he's not really gay though, don't worry everyone.
And what about you, Jem?
You're going to hate me for this.
Go on.
Life is Strange. The two main characters it feels very much like The Last of Us, but they're a bit older. And there's this are they, aren't they thing going throughout. But it's a coming-of-age story that doesn't let itself be a coming-of-age story. It just doesn't really talk about it. I'm like, if you're going to do it properly. And I understand there are people who feel like, oh no, it should be understated. It should be, like, it shouldn't be a defining part of the characteristic. I'm like, but if this is like, if one of the main story beats is these two people finding out about themselves and each other and developing that bond, then it should be overt. It should be explicit.
Sarah, what about you?
The one that annoyed me most recently was in Life is Strange. So, they have this kind of, what I consider to be a really, like, sweet and genuine moment when they've broken into the school and they're kind of talking to each other in a swimming pool, and it's just like, it's very sweet and nice and feels completely natural. Jump cut to the bedroom, and it's all like, la la la, sweet and nice, and then she's just like, kiss my face. And it felt like it was someone smashing two Barbie dolls together. I don't know, it felt like it had been written by a room full of straight guys who had heard a community say, like, hey, they fancy each other, right? And they're like, yeah, make them kiss.
Life is Strange on bad form there, it seems. Erica, what is your worst representation?
I've been trying to think about this as far as trans women go. Again, I can't say much because there is nothing in the first place. There are almost no characters, I think... So as far as, to me, the bad sides of this is that there is no representation of trans people outside of a couple of notable NPCs in some RPGs recently,
Frank, how's about you?
I think it's when they just kind of wedge it in and it's an afterthought. Or even worse, it's an adaptation. Poison, who's in Street Fighter and Final Fight. Poison was kind of made transgender just from the fact that in the Western version of the game, they weren't so happy with people beating up a girl. So they switched a few characters to men and they kind of left Poison and said that she was transgender. And Capcom kind of followed through with it and have withdrawn that she's male and she's transgender and haven't really done much with it.
And for you, Aoife?
Any kind of early sort of stereotype in games, it's just really tired. Like, actually, Resident Evil in Code Veronica, just the whole, the really tired trope of, like, cross-dressing freak, I think is really offensive and really quite hurtful.
So, some pretty awful examples there, really. Now, onto things in your professional lives. Do you ever try to incorporate LGBT representation in your line of work where it's appropriate? Andy, let's start with you.
So, I guess, brief history. I worked at a couple of companies in Dundee. First game I worked on was Evil Dead 2, Festival of Boomstick. And then moved down here to Leamington, worked at Codemasters for about 7 or 8 years. Worked on a lot of racing games. So all the Dirt series, Dirt 1, 2, 3, Grid 1 and 2, Formula 1. A lot of external titles, Clive Barker's Jericho. The last 2 years I worked at Activision, at Freestyle Games, and worked on Guitar Hero. So it's tricky because a lot of the games I've worked on, they didn't have the scope for a deep story. So for us to go, hey, you're going to be the best driver, but you're going to be the most fabulous driver.
This series on RuPaul's Drag Race.
You know what? She's got cars in there. I mean,
She does.
that would be the ideal game.
Aoife, how about you?
Absolutely, I do. Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I've made videos on YouTube about LGBT representation in games, and actually I've written quite a few articles where I openly identify as bisexual where appropriate. So I wrote an article last year about Quiet in Metal Gear Solid 5 and just how her representation, or just her tits are just so completely over the top. And the only reason I reference my bisexuality in it is because I think that it stops the argument of, oh, you're a woman, you're just, jealous, which is something I've actually had leveled at me before, because I'm writing as a woman, I'm jealous of female game characters, which is absolutely the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. But it's like, I am also attracted to women, and I am here to tell you that it's stupid. Come on now, we're better than this.
And do you, Keza?
I try to talk about LGBT issues. I think, to be honest, as a journalist, and previous to my current job as a person who's on camera a lot, probably one of the most valuable things you can do is just exist, and write about these things when they come up if you want to. And I don't feel that there should be this kind of massive obligation on queer or feminist or in any other way unusual writers to always write about that thing.
And Frank, what's it like from a marketing point?
Part of my work is that I write a lot of surveys for gamers, and we traditionally open our surveys with gender and age questions. And as it stands, and it's still to this day, as much as I've tried to change it, we just ask, are you male or female? And you click a little man and you click a little woman. It doesn't say, which do you identify as? It doesn't give you any sort of other option. And so I feel at that kind of point, anyone who's doesn't identify as male or female, or technically isn't male or female, or however they feel about it, can't really represent themselves in our surveys. And we're trying to get everyone into our surveys. So I was adamant that we should change this. I came up quite a bit of resistance against it. But I mean, I guess it didn't upset me or make me angry. I was just annoyed that someone hadn't thought about this.
Yeah.
And that it took someone who was gay to have to think about it.
Jem, what about you?
Yeah, I write about it whenever I can. Well, not whenever. Not like, oh, I'm going to write a gay story now.
Yeah.
But like, if it comes up, then I'm happy to do that. I like that. Not a lot of call for it in esports.
It's great to see that you guys are trying where you can. I phrased the question intentionally with the words where appropriate, because sometimes it just isn't. Another workplace question, though. Have you ever experienced anything in your line of work to do with LGBT that's upset you or made you angry? Jem, you first.
Other than the obvious, like just general abuse on the internet, just like the gaming community and its inability to not be an entitled douchebag.
Yeah. Keza, have you?
Well, one thing I would get a lot, because I used to work for IGN, which I really enjoyed, but I used to really confuse the IGN audience, like really confuse them.
Really?
Yes.
They just couldn't get
They
in the head
really
around it.
couldn't figure out what was going on because, you can't see me over this podcast, but I'm a kind of tall woman with a fairly low voice and short blonde hair. And, people would just be like, comments and stuff, they'd be like, you look so gay. And it's like, yeah, I look pretty gay. I do own a mirror. And it's like, people would say stuff like that intended as like an insult or put down. And to me, it's just like, it's like saying I'm tall. It's just two true facts about how I look. And it didn't, like I say, it didn't necessarily cause me problems or make me upset or angry, but it certainly was an eye-opener. That, just being a sort of slightly gender nonconformist woman on camera was enough to sort of send this percentage of people into like a massive spiral of like, what even is gender? It was very strange.
Andy, as someone who's worked in a large dev team, have you ever experienced this?
Yeah, so I've worked at a bunch of studios now where, no one's a dick. But most studios, in fact, all studios I've worked at, are predominantly white, male, heterosexual environments. If you take, let's say, an average game studio, like AAA studio of 100 devs, and you're thinking 40 programmers, 40 artists, 10 design, reception, HR, finance, and then you'll have like a couple of audio guys, because that's how it works. You're on about like 97% male. It's terrible. And it means meetings and games when they're getting designed, it can be a bit bro-tastic in terms of there's a lot of testosterone going around the office. There's a lot of kind of, guys talking about football, and whereas that's okay to a degree, it doesn't help push the boundaries. You know what? I'm not even saying this is anything about video games at all, because it's not. I mean, this happens in any industry. So any male-dominated industry, whether it's a garage right? You know, it's tough. Construction industry, all that type of stuff. But I like to think in video games we can be better than that.
And Aoife, how about you?
Sometimes if certain commenters, certain dark places of the internet get an inkling that you are LGBT, they will, of course, use that as ammunition against you. I've been called an angry dyke before.
Really?
Yeah. When I wasn't even being angry, you know, again, it's in context of that quiet piece, you know, where the whole point of it was to inject a bit of humor into the controversy, which I think I did, you know. I mean, I'll be damned if, you know, I let something like ridiculous jiggle physics make me angry, but yeah, of course, like, I wouldn't say that I get upset by it because I'm pretty confident in who I am and what I like, and, you know, I'm too bloody old now to, like, actually let people like that upset me. People that, you know, are being anonymous on the internet, of course they're going to fling insults. Like, let's see them here in real life and say the same thing.
Exactly,
but
yeah. Erica, have you?
I'm very grateful to say that I haven't witnessed anything horrific or really bad, or, you know, but again, in the industry which I work in, there's not hardly any room for terrible homophobia or transphobia to come in and have to deal with it, you know?
How about you, Sarah?
As much as, you know, people who write stuff on the internet are like, don't read the comments, it can be my job to read the comments, to monitor stuff on the site. And I guess the most depressing thing is that, like, I expect the worst from the internet. So we have a whole great community of mods who are like user level, but they're like sort of mods who work with us. They're really great. And we can sort of page them in times of need to say, like, hey friends, can you please jump on this article to help us, like, you know, weed out all the trash? As soon as, like, actually generally before any article that's published that has like any LGBT queer content to do with it at all, we'll be like, page the mods. And that's just a reality. But it's kind of depressing that I expect the worst from the internet.
So it seems the internet and commenters are the worst then. No surprise there, I guess. But I'm so glad to hear that no one lets it get to them or stops them from standing up and speaking their mind. So, next question. Overall, do you feel represented in video games? Erica, let's start with you.
No, not in the slightest. And I think that there is room for it, and I wouldn't be surprised if that starts growing now. I think as far as AAA games goes, companies like BioWare and Blizzard especially, I feel like would be two companies who would be at the forefront of pushing that forward.
And Jem, how do you feel about it?
I think in recent years, it's got a hell of a lot better. There are games I haven't even played which have incredible LGBT representation, like I'm told Dragon Age, and I haven't played Mass Effect 3 yet. Shh.
Frank, how about you?
No, not really. Part of it, me being, you know, a subsect within gay culture, the whole bear thing. Mm-hmm. But I think often it's so much either tacked on or an afterthought or not part of the story. So I'm not catered for as such. It's more that it's not quite done as much as I'd like it to be. It's not quite as run of the mill. It's still something that, you know, when you see a review for it and it's mentioned, you get loads of negative comments and stuff. So it's just, yeah, I don't think it's quite there yet, but it's getting better, I think.
And Keza, do you feel represented?
I am feeling increasingly represented by video games. I mean, it occurred to me, obviously, that games didn't have very many women in them and certainly didn't have very many women like me in them. But I didn't used to think about it too hard. And then when I started thinking about it harder, it kind of thankfully coincided with a really interesting wave of games that also were thinking about it harder. And also with the democratization of game development, with indie game development, which means that there are now loads and loads of games from people of backgrounds that weren't making games when I was growing up and that weren't making games when I started being a games writer.
So it seems we're getting there in some sectors and not in others. As we've said, hopefully in the coming years, representation will increase, not just in indie games, but in the AAA titles as well. Okay, this is a bit of a broad question, but tell me, what do you feel is the biggest obstacle to LGBT in games? Andy?
I'm a firm believer that you can be out in the workplace, but again, some of the places I've worked at, I've known one or two other guys. I've known, out of the 100 people, I've been quite out and proud. In that 100, if the statistic is meant to be, what, 1 in 10, people are gay?
Yeah.
Never seen that.
No?
Working. No, it's always. I mean, I've known one or two other guys maybe at the company that may be gay. One of them may be out, but will never kind of out when he's outside of work, but not when he's inside work, which seems ridiculous. And it'll be like a third guy that's just totally in the closet and would never come out. And it's like, oh, come on, like I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, I had a tough time coming out and all this type of stuff, but it helps these games if more people that are willing to come out are, because it encourages thought, it evokes attitude. It brings out the better in what we can do in terms of development, which is a good thing.
And how about you, Aoife?
I think that it's people resisting the notion of it, because I think that it's so easy to dismiss blatant homophobia, but it's when people start to dress up their concerns as something else that you get something a lot more insidious and quite underlyingly evil. Like when people start to say, oh, no, it's it should be good writing that the games need, not good representation. It's like, why not both, bro? Like, why are there so many qualifiers in place to having a non-hetero, like any kind of LGBT relationship? Why do we have to pass so many checkpoints before that's allowed? But a male-female relationship is the standard that's never questioned. That's the problem, I think.
Frank, what would you say is the biggest obstacle?
I think it's general consumers or gamers themselves. It's about if writers felt that the people buying their games and the publishers felt that people buying their games were more open to it, were more okay with it, weren't filling all the forums and Reddit and the review comments with kind of spite about it whenever it turns up, then they'd be more happy to do it. But I think at the moment, they've got to sell a product and you want to give your product the best chance to sell. And I think representing gay people in a main story is a dangerous one for alienating a lot of people.
And Jem?
It's inclusion, but not for inclusion's sake. And not making it like the big thing, but making it big enough thing for people to be able to relate. Games characters shouldn't just be sexless automatons. I think there should be more sex and sexuality in games, even if it is like more straight relationships, because we're still not. Uncharted 4, Drake and Eleanor is like one of the best relationships in video games history.
They're brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Many, many things to get past then. All completely accurate as well. Now, final question. What would be your ideal way of representing the LGBT community in video games? Erica, let's start with you.
I mentioned before about characters which are openly lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and it's maybe something which is related to the background of the character, something which might come in terms of a meaningful and emotional romantic subplot. But not something which is driving the plot. Something which is not defining parts of their personality. More like that. More characters like that would be nice.
And Andy, what do you think?
There's a couple of games where the gender choice or sexuality is down to the user. It's almost like customization. In loads of games, APB, Crackdown, whatever, customizing your eyebrows, you're customizing your cheekbones, your nipple piercing, and your sexuality. That's cool that you can do that, but as you say, it's a user choice, and it would be much more cool if a developer said, hey, here is our design for the game, here is our story, here are our characters, much like a film, and deal with it.
Frank, what about you?
I think it's just that, the story. I'm okay with people making a big deal about it. Okay, they're gay, because, I've had that in my life where people are suddenly like, oh, okay, you're gay. Okay, that's a big deal. Or whatever, not necessarily negative, but it'd be nice to have that in the story, part of the story, someone falling in love with someone, going to that point. At the moment, it's that tacked on kind of feel, and it's optional. If it's something that someone's given to you, a story that's written out, you can't change it. You can't make that person ungay.
And Jem, what would you like?
I don't know, more gay porn in games. Let's go with that.
Sure.
Just better relationships across the board, including minorities.
Keza, what about you?
I think just it would be nice if it wasn't such a big deal when there was a gay character or a game that did gay character as well. I mean, developers can't control this, but it would be nice if it wasn't made in such an issue by people who play games. I like to think that at some point there'll be a gay character in a game and it will just pass without comment, and to the people to whom it's important, it will be very important and it will mean a lot to them. And to the people whom it doesn't affect just won't care.
Sarah, how would you like to represent?
More. Just more. To be honest, we're still at this point with just women being represented in games. Like, that still hasn't been sorted out. I feel like we're still at a point where any of these characters need to be like these paragons of virtue and justice so that people can't assume that all, people like them are like that. I want to get to a point where there's enough representation that I don't feel bad about there being an evil gay character.
And finally, Aoife.
I just want us to be there. I want to like come across a character and be like, like just someone who's badass and interesting and funny and all these other things, maybe evil, maybe like really flawed, and then finding suddenly, oh, they're bi.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Like that's, or trans or whatever. Like just, I mean, God, I'm so bored of playing a straight guy. Like, how is everyone not bored of that? That's the other thing. Like, I'm getting really tired of implied gal pals. I would love like a woman who is like sex positive, open with their bisexuality, and owning it. Like that's what I want. Yes, Bayonetta is a badass. I love her. I want more of that. I want that female dom. Like absolutely. Like, yep, these are my tits. Yep, this is my crotch. And what?
Yeah. And that'll conclude our interviews from my incredible guests. Thank you so much for all of those fantastic answers. So, what have I learned from all this? Well, I think ultimately most opinions seem to come down to one of two opposing sides, both of which have equal merit. The first is that LGBT characters in games should be more prominent. They should reveal their sexuality and it be a story beat. They need to break out of the molds that have been cast for them and show the world that being gay is nothing more complex than liking or disliking mushrooms. But, devil's advocate, to some, this comes across as LGBT characters being a fad and the it thing for publishers to add in right now. The second is that people would like LGBT characters to just be, to exist in these worlds and games, and for it not to be an issue in the slightest. For it to be the most normal thing that doesn't even need to be discussed. But, again, devil's advocate, to some, this doesn't get anything across and doesn't further anything. Characters revealed as gay after the fact shows a weakness in the publisher's confidence that something might not sell well. It's a proper double-edged sword, and seemingly a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation. But hey, that's the internet as a whole, right? Personally, I fall on the side of that it should be addressed. I feel that if a character is LGBT, then they should just be LGBT. I mentioned earlier about RPG games being great for LGBT characters, which they are, but a lot of romanceable characters in these games are gay if I choose them to be rather than it being the default. Writers shouldn't be worried to commit to their ideas and see them through because it might offend anyone or not sell well. I know I'm talking crazy because they're all out to make all the money ever, but I know I'd much rather see two strong women in love holding hands than another bland grey shooter that tries to out-offend its predecessor in a more bloody and violent way. But look, at the end of the day, if this keeps forwarding the LGBT conversation as a whole, then I'm absolutely all for it, because if I've learned anything here, it's that we still have a long way to go, and it's only by addressing these issues head-on will anything progress. I don't think I'm asking much for games to portray LGBT fairly, and without added character traits such as mental issues, being a villain, a racist, or a paedophile. Right now, the games that are being released, by and large, aren't doing much in the way of furthering or progressing society's view on the community. It seems a lot of representation currently falls in the hands of indie developers making games such as the fantastic Gone Home, Breaking the Ice, or Triad. I might just be some crazy left-wing madman, but I firmly believe in the idea of equality being shown from a very early age, in every form, from the flamboyant males to the masculine females and everything in between. I can't begin to tell you how much it would have helped me as a child to see all sides of the spectrum represented on screen in one way or another so that I could relate and see that what I was experiencing was perfectly normal. And not just for the LGBT children, I mean for the heterosexual children as well, so that they are exposed to these themes too. I'm obviously not talking about showing two guys getting it on in the middle of the Mushroom Kingdom, but I mean, maybe having two gay dads or mums in a game aimed at kids, or an LGBT main character. Anything along those lines would have been fantastic for me growing up. What's wrong with a well-rounded LGBT character? In my eyes, absolutely nothing. Thankfully, like I said at the very top, I'm incredibly fortunate to have a network around me of very loving and supportive friends and family. I'm proud that I can be a role model for my young nephews and nieces who will grow up knowing their uncle is gay, and that that's okay. I didn't set out to make this podcast to change the world, of course. I made it to educate myself and to learn a thing or two. But if I can get through to just one person and make them see things a little differently, then I'll be more than happy with that. Right. Now that's all said and done, how do I answer my initial question? Is the LGBT community being represented enough in video games? And I think I'll answer it like this. We're off to a slow start, but in recent years the LGBT community has definitely had some pretty great, strong representation here and there. Indie games are leading the charge, but AAA games will pick up the slack eventually. I'm absolutely sure of it. We have a very long way to go, of course, and I'll monitor it closely because, as it turns out, I do know that I care. And that's it. We're done. I've tried my best to get my head around this topic, and I've genuinely enjoyed putting this show together, and I hope that you've enjoyed it too. I'd like to thank everyone who helped out and participated and put up with my talking about this endlessly. To Frank Hopewell-Smith, Andy Greer, Aoife Wilson, Keza McDonald, Jem Alexander, Sarah Lynch and Erica Vale. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on and being so open. You are all infinitely wiser than me, and I love you all. Honestly, I have so much audio that I haven't used from their interviews that I'm considering releasing them as bonus episodes here and there. If that's something you'd be into, let me know. To Sounding Sweet in Stratford-upon-Avon for allowing me to record Andy Greer in their incredible studios. Seriously, check them out at soundingsweet.com. They are amazing. And then again to Andy for helping me balance and fine-tune this episode. It's like audio is his career or something. To Dan, Ash and Gareth, my co-hosts, my business partners and my friends. Thank you for letting me use this platform for this episode. And thank you to Catherine for letting me read most of this to her first. And finally, thank you to you, the listeners, for making the Explosive Alan podcast what it is. A safe, silly space for us to have fun without fear or judgment. If you'd like to get in touch with us here at Explosive Alan, then please do so over on our Facebook page, Explosive Alan Productions, on Twitter at explosive_Alan, or you can contact me personally on Twitter at Chunkster62. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please do share it around. I'd love this to go as far as it can, and I'm more than happy to talk about this with anyone. I'd like to close out this podcast once again by saying that I'm dedicating this episode to the tragic victims of the Orlando attack. My thoughts are with you all in this undoubtedly awful time, and I stand in solidarity with you all. I read an awful post on Facebook that had me so concerned. It spoke about how hundreds of thousands of young, confused teens around the world woke up to news that people were murdered in a club for openly being themselves. What an awful and terrifying thought. I hope the world extends its arms to these people and that it makes them feel comforted and comfortable enough to stand up and own who they are. Or at the very least, that a video game can shine some light and help them through this very troubled and confusing time. Cliched as it sounds, it really, genuinely does get better. And with that said, I hope you all have a fantastic Pride. And remember, if you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? Can I get an amen up in here? Now let the music play. Everyone has a good way that they've included LGBT stuff and things. I still haven't done it yet. What am I doing?
In your work?
In my work, I still haven't done it. But
You just did an animation for RuPaul.
You're so right. I did. Wait a minute.
I was like that.
I animated a drag queen.
That was the gayest piece of work I've seen from you. I mean, it was great.
Oh, Simon.
But you're like, I'm so hetero.
I'm so hetero. I just animate Adore Delano for fun. For kicks.